Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow feathers in arms, welcome back to the Conversations That Quack, episode number 4, your conversational podcast for the thoughts that linger when the lights go up and the credits are long over. I am one of your hosts, Brandan Jones, and joining me downstream on this adventure, the man, the myth, a quack who can see all the colors, Mr. Yfran Garcia.
Heyo, heyo. Happy to be here.
And if you are just joining us well into the future or in near real time, welcome. This is a podcast where Yfran and I rock an often candid and honest conversation about the variety of issues facing the Black protagonist in our movie of the week and where that ultimately leaves us as a people. If you enjoy what you hear, help us keep it going by supporting us over at patreon.com/Pandora's Quack and becoming a patron of one of our tiers that start as low as $1, which includes early access to podcasts like these, as well as our sister podcast, The Movies That Quack, where co-host Wade Slicken and I put each other on the spot each week to ask each other Hollywood's most poignant and stupid questions, as well as The Rabbit Holes That Quack, where co-host Nicole Matthews and I do a weekly deep dive into documentaries that mostly have something to say. But of course, if parting with that dollar is not in the cards for you right now, that is more than okay. Feel free to share, rate, and review us on the podcasting service of your choice, and stick around for more upcoming shenanigans from Pandora's Quack. And so, without further ado, these are the Conversations That Quack. Tonight's movie of the week is called Fast Color. Fast Color is about a woman who, after years of hiding, is forced to go on the run when her superhuman abilities are discovered. Years after having abandoned her family, the only place she has left to hide is home. It is directed by Julia Hart, who's responsible for Miss Stevens, Stargirl, and I'm Your Woman. It is written by Julia Hart and Jordan Horowitz, who wrote the aforementioned, as well as seem to be writing partners. I think they're actually married. I think I actually read that, which is pretty cool. Stars Gugu Mbatha-Raw, David Strathairn, and Lauren Toussaint. And as of this recording, Rotten Tomatoes has this as a 81% critical rating and a 59% audience rating. So, much like we began this podcast, dear sir, with 3 movies dealing with Black movie protagonists facing off against the quote-unquote system, we will now be turning our sights on the superhero genre, starting with Fast Color. As usual, before we jump in, I want to give everyone a blanket spoiler warning for the movie. We'll try to avoid details about the climax of the movie as much as we can, but don't want to hold back the conversation if it turns out to be important to the time Yfran and I have here. So that being said, feel free to hit pause or save this podcast until you've had a chance to check out Fast Color, currently streaming on Hulu. So Mr. Garcia, let's begin. You see this thumbnail, this poster. You know, you've probably heard me talk a little bit about it last week, maybe even saw a trailer. Any preliminary thoughts or expectations heading into Fast Color, whether it's about Gugu Mbatha-Raw, just kind of the premise, the sort of, powers, anything that you were kind of like, what is this? What is this lovely film that we're about to jump into?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the poster, you get the idea of like, okay. I mean, and you told me about this. You told me about this before too. But this is going to be like some sort of superhero movie, where it's going to be some kind of rebellion. It always has like these superhero movies always have like this X-Men Logan theme, where it's like you are this mutant, if you will. We'll keep the X-Men theme, and although this movie's not like that, but we'll keep it there. Like you are this mutant as a way. And you are someone who goes against society, right? Like society wants you either dead or put away somewhere, and you're using your powers to survive, or even your powers for good. So when I first heard about this movie, I thought it was going to be something like that. Those were my initial thoughts, but this doesn't really, after watching the movie, it doesn't really feel like a traditional superhero movie, in my opinion. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, it's funny because I've hovered over this movie probably at least like a half a dozen times in the past couple years, and it always seemed from the outside looking in, I don't know that I had watched a trailer of it. I would assume that I had, that it was going to be a little bit too mellow for what I was in the mood for sort of at the time. So Obviously thought this might have been a great opportunity to finally pull the trigger and sort of see what convinced Gugu to don the proverbial cape and cowl. She's one of those actresses to me that pops up sort of at the exact right moment, like in Cloverfield Paradox. I don't know if you saw that on Netflix from a few years ago, kind of a wild sci-fi movie. So I was excited to see what she was up to, and this movie was fine. It's kind of like how I would put it. Broadly, before I kind of kick it over to you, it's sort of, it felt like the idea was too big for the budget. And like, there were some things about it that felt like either they shouldn't have been mentioned, or we should have seen it, or they should have gone like a little bit more to sort of the scale for it. And I kind of had the benefit of, I think you may have seen it twice as well. I kind of watched it first last week and then just had it running while I was working today. And some of the stuff that I was a little bit confused by, which we'll kind of get into, made a little bit more sense, kind of knowing how it ended and kind of stuff about the beginning. But yeah, it just kind of, I think I appreciated the intention a lot more the second time, but it just sort of, it was a movie that happened, if that makes sense. What did you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree there, Brandon. Even now, I did the same thing as you. I watched the movie a couple weeks ago, and then I watched it a little bit again today, just to have some more understanding of this movie, and I still struggle with it. I still find myself asking, like, what is there to learn from this movie? In my opinion, I just don't know. Maybe I just didn't get it, and that's totally plausible. I just don't understand what there was for me to take from this movie, and it's crazy because I am a big fan of like superhero movies. I am a big fan of the genre itself. And there's a movie it's funny. Like if you look at the poster and I don't know this woman, not Ruth, not the actor in this movie, but there's another movie called The Darkest Minds that's just like almost has like a similar poster. And colors play a big role in that one as well, and it's a superhero movie.
Yeah.
And I just thought that, like, when we get back to initial thoughts on this movie, I thought it was going to be something similar to that. Again, it wasn't, and not only that, I feel like there's nothing I gained from watching this movie. I think we can talk about it. We can go into it.
Yeah.
But I was super super confused by the movie and its point, its intention. It sounds like you understood what the point was, but didn't think it was necessary. But that's totally fine. I'm still over here wondering like what the point of this movie was.
Yeah.
Because to me, it just didn't really seem to hit home.
Yeah, it was sort of, I remember being incredibly confused for the first 30 minutes of the movie, mostly because it felt really unclear what the rules of the world were. One of the things that I joke around a lot on the podcast I do with Wade, the Movies That Quack, is that, we can't go a week without mentioning John Wick or Marvel or even Zack Snyder. That's kind of just like our pillars of, our references. And the reason why I mentioned John Wick a lot, for people who haven't seen it, definitely go check that out. But I think that they build the world of that movie incredibly well by saying very little. And it's one of those things where they kind of tell you exactly what you need to hear for your imagination to kind of go wild without you kind of wondering about the logistics of the story you're watching. You're excited to find out what else that is in this world, but it doesn't impact what you're actually watching. And I felt like with this movie, because I never really got a sense until much, much later, maybe towards the middle, towards the end of the movie, what even her powers were, it sort of was like, I don't know, like, does this make sense? Are these powers arbitrary? Like, do they actually tie into the plot? And then conversely, how sort of hell-bent were the people chasing after her in actually getting her? Because even those people didn't really have an ominous vibe to them. Like, they didn't really seem like a group of people that she should be afraid of, or really that they kind of had any power. So it was sort of this weird thing where, it's kind of that vibe when you're like watching, someone, it's kind of like a funny example of like when you're a kid and like your friend's mom walks in the room and like, you know, you can tell when you're in trouble. Like there's just like that vibe where you're like, oh, okay, like we're too loud or something like that. And then there's like a different thing where it's like, you know, the mom comes in and it's like, oh, cool, like we're getting snacks or something like that. And it was just like one of those things where I couldn't tell how seriously we should be caring about these people chasing her, because if she has powers, then there didn't really seem to be any sort of sense of urgency or danger there outside of what they were just verbalizing to us. And then like at that point, with that in my head, it was just sort of, I won't call it nitpicking. It was just, I started to see the seams all over the place of like what could have been, call it stronger creative choices that just felt, you know, I just kept boiling it back down to, this feels too big of an idea for this low budget of a movie. And then ironically, I think it actually is currently being adapted into a television series, which actually might work far better for what they're trying to do, especially kind of with the low, mellow kind of key independent film vibe that they have, which I appreciated. But it just, when you kind of jump into this genre, there are just certain things that I think as an audience you expect that just didn't really hit in this movie and kind of just left it as like a fine.
I agree, and yeah, maybe as a TV series it could work. Maybe like Heroes did. You know, I think that was like Odessa, Texas, and this is like Garrison, Texas, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely could work as a TV series. As a movie, I agree with you there. I think that, you know, in the beginning I said it didn't really feel like a superhero movie, if you will, but it still had. Don't get me wrong, like it still had some like, you know, X-Men superhero movie components, and mainly like I called out this woman who's otherworldly, who has supernatural ability, and is being chased down by the government, whoever it is. But even Bill, like the scientists that are after her, didn't even seem like they wanted to cause too much harm, but rather just like run tests on her to better understand her abilities. Like they actually came out pretty nice.
Yeah.
The scientists who were after her. I mean, it sounded like their bosses were a little bit more intense. But the scientist, Bill himself, was quite, I thought was quite nice. In my opinion, like, you know, I'm not going to say she overreacted, but, you know, when he pulled out, like,
Yeah.
he did pull out like a device, whatever a shot it was.
Like, I'm just going to stick you with this.
To try to prick her. I think that was way too soon to do that, Bill. But I do think that he came off quite nice. It sounded like they just had a mission, that they were trying to fulfill, and they were just trying to understand her and her abilities a little bit better. Yeah, but continuing on, you know, she still went on the run. She, you know, punched Bill in the face or kicked him in the face. I laugh because, you know, she kicked him in the face, but his face looked really messed up after she got out of the car. It was like one kick in the face and she ran away, and the next scene you see Bill's face and it really looks like she did a number on his face.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite funny. I was like, wasn't that just a kick in the face? I don't know. That's pretty funny. But continuing on, you know, she still goes on the run and runs away from Bill in that car scene, and then ends up returning home, you know, where she's reunited with her family. I just agree. I agree with you, Brandon. I think that, like, you know, I don't know. You know, she's running away from who? Who's she running away from? This guy who sounds like could have been a good friend, a nice guy. You know, and it just doesn't seem like there's a clear and imminent danger there. But I do think that she's scared. You know, she's on the run. You know, and I think that's something that's taken some consideration. Like, she's on the run and she's scared. She doesn't know what society has in store for her. She can't even control her powers, which is the ability to trigger earthquakes. So I think maybe she was scared that she can't really trust anyone, or can't really protect herself at this point. Until she gets some understanding about what her powers are. You know, it sounds like she had a great understanding as a youth, as a child. But you know, things in her life have changed, and she ran away from home, and it seems like she has lost the ability to control her power. So maybe that's why she was a bit scared.
Yeah, I really liked when she does finally kind of get to her family, the lineage that was there. And kind of just, you know, running up and down the sort of the movie where it's like, you know, initially you have like her mother, and then who seems like it's sort of like an adopted kind of daughter, and then they kind of like reveal that to be Ruth's daughter, which I thought, I guess, was cool because it wasn't this like like the movie I felt tried to do these familial reveals in a way that went against what you were expecting, but then I feel like they didn't really do anything with it. Like it was interesting to kind of be like, oh hey, Ruth, this is your daughter, or like this is your, you know, mother. And, you know, there wasn't sort of like a, you know, that classic annoying speech of you've lied to me my whole life and da da da. We didn't have to like burn through screen time with that. So I appreciated that. But it was also just kind of like, did that really add anything to sort of the drama of the story or to the stakes or to anything of that nature? And I don't really think it did. It was kind of interesting, like watching them, like all of them, kind of the three of them interact and such. And I kind of, again, like when I was saying, like kind of rewatching it passively the second time, I appreciated that it seemed like the intent at least was to sort of showcase three generations of women that have had these powers that have seemingly been passed down from generation to generation, back further than even the mother sort of knew based off of that journal. But then I just don't know that it actually got explored in a way that went beyond more than a surface idea. Like it kind of was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, so what are we gonna like do with that? Is it gonna turn out that like the great great something, or you know, is there gonna be a twist on that information? Is that going to sort of really matter as we kind of come down the road? And there was that sort of, you know, which we'll sort of get to the ending. There was that sort of, I guess, other woman.
Yeah.
But even that just kind of felt like you could lift that line completely out of the movie and it wouldn't have changed the course of anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was the point. I think I was going to say the same thing. I think there was that bond of that other woman who was like them, who they thought was like a fairy tale, and
Yeah.
she was like, um, you know, she was also had superpowers, and she was great. She could split the sea or whatever it was, the ocean or whatever, the sky, I think it was,
Yeah.
which was insane. So I think they always thought that, you know, it was an idol, like it was like a role model for them. You know, it was like a fairy tale that they could follow, and then you know in the end they find out that 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 Bo, who is Ruth's mother, Lila's grandma, actually knew that that person existed in Rome, Europe. So I do think I think that was a cool twist in the end. Not really a twist, but I think it was a cool like add-in in
Yeah.
the end. I tried to hold on to that story as well. I always try to solve the story, right? I always try to see like what's happening, but what's going to happen next. This one was interesting because the entire movie you're sitting there wondering what's going to happen and like what direction it's going in and when it's going to get to the point.
Yeah.
And it's slow, dude. Like it's so slow, and it's fine. Like I'm fine with a slow movie.
Yeah.
I just don't think the movie paid off in the end to reward you for sitting through the slowness.
Yeah.
And that's my problem with the movie. I think again, and it's I do want to stick on to the point with you mentioned with the lineage of the women and the mother. I thought the mother was great. I thought Bo was fantastic.
Mm.
And I do like the idea of her just keeping this tight ship of the daughters, where you know Steve is the one who learned how to use her own powers, and now she's teaching them how to control their powers. Ruth first as a youth, until she ran away, and then Lila, her daughter, Ruth's daughter, who she was taking care of, raising.
Yeah.
And I do like how I just love the respect. Something I relate to, and I think like a lot of not to bring like race back into this, but I think a lot of African American families can relate to this.
Yeah.
Having a mother who is so disciplined, if you will, and all the children respecting that mother, and even her mother, the grandma. So I think that's something I relate to a lot, and I just love the respect, at least from Lila, for Bo, and how much she appreciates what she's doing for her until she sees it's funny until she sees her own mother, right? Like she sees Ruth, and Ruth has a seizure when she's finally home. So the daughter, Lila, can see what's happening, like who Ruth is, like, you know, that this is her mother. That's when she's introduced to her as her mother. And it's funny because when she notices Ruth, it kind of feels like the daughter becomes more and more like Ruth. Like she becomes more and more rebellious.
Yeah.
In a way, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's like she saw her mother, like she was kind of like very following the norm. But then it's revealed that Lila, the daughter, wants to get away someday, you know, and she could fix things really well, like anything she could fix. But she's also fixing this car out front. But she wants to fix that car because she wants to escape. And I really feel like that was kind of interesting too, because that's when you get to see that it's revealed that this is actually, you couldn't deny it at this point, that this is Ruth's daughter. Like she's actually going through the same thing as a child that Ruth was going through as a teen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, she's on this path as well of rebellion, and it only seems like that Ruth coming home was the catalyst for her own rebellion to take place, and she starts cursing and things like that. So I do think that's an interesting point with the family. I did like the relationship. I just thought they focused on the characters so much, and they got you so hooked on these characters, but it just doesn't pay off. Like, does it really matter that Bo is who she is? I thought she was great, but does it really matter? It seemed like there was no deeper, to your point, like no deeper story. She's the great, Bambino, whatever she is, there's just no story. There's just really not a great story there. It's kind of just short, and to the point there. So, I don't know. It really feels like this entire movie you're waiting for something to break through, or waiting for something to happen, or waiting for like an aha moment or a climax. But I just feel like none of that happened.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting the point that you made about how I think in like the Black, sort of family dynamic, that there definitely always seems to be this very strong matriarchal like figure. Like there's like everyone has like Big Mama. You have like Medea, there's Oprah. It's kind of just very, very pervasive that there's sort of just the Black mother in culture. It's kind of a fascinating thing to think about, because when you think about like, in other cultures, I think it's probably very similar for maybe the Hispanic community, although I feel like there's actually sort of maybe equal weight, where there's a grandfather that's kind of like, there, and then there is sort of like the mother. I think there's probably a little bit more duality there, but it's interesting because then when you start kind of going to, say like sort of Asian culture, it's very much sort of the patriarchy, and then similar with like white culture, it's very much the patriarchy. But it is interesting that you pointed that out, because I hadn't really thought about that, but that's absolutely true, that there's definitely sort of a matriarchy type dynamic that seems to kind of be very pervasive in Black culture, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I think the issue with Bo is especially because it's like, okay, when you imagine, it's cool to see the parlor tricks that she's kind of doing. She even kind of uses that phrase about how Lila kind of does some stuff, but you see her. I thought it was really cool that she's like smoking the cigarette and kind of was taking it apart, kind of got startled, it turns to dust, and then she reforms it and keeps smoking it. Like it's, I've just felt like I was hoping, I guess, or maybe again, like when you think about the expectations of the genre, that like that was going to mean something. And then when you kind of get to that final confrontation, again, kind of what I mean about like, where was it seemed like, they didn't have the budget. It seems like someone, so if you have Lila who's able to put together the bowl, but can't quite do the window, and then you have Ruth who can cause earthquakes, and really, it may even, I guess, sort of the implication is that her moving the tectonic plates perhaps fixed the sky, and then it's like, then you would expect Bo to do some like next level, whether it was like taking apart the building and like turning it to dust, then putting it back, or like something a little bit more dramatic than sort of the guns. And it just was like, oh, okay, that kind of feels anticlimactic. Like the emotion, I guess, was there, but just sort of the like, again, like if this was just if this wasn't a superhero movie and she just had like a gun drawn, that could be like 10 times more powerful. But it's like, you have powers. You are saying, I'm afraid, or rather, I'm no longer afraid of hiding my powers. You're going to get sort of the full unfiltered version of it. And then I feel like she just didn't really, the movie didn't give her that moment. It may have thought that it did, but it just didn't feel like it like delivered on that. And so then it was sort of, again, like it's sort of like the movie feels like it's to kind of, listeners, we were talking about DJing before we kind of went on the air. I feel like this movie is everything except the drop in like a DJ set. Like you're feeling the build up and it's cool, and you're like, you have all these like breadcrumbs like being sprinkled in. Like There's a lot of great idea, like the stuff that was about the water. I thought that was going to come back in like a really interesting way because I'd never like heard that before. I've never seen that in like a movie before, where they just kind of go, "Hey, like water is just it's dry. It's gotten to the point where it hasn't rained in a really
Yeah.
long time." And I just was like, "Oh, that's really like fascinating." Like people are like buying water like they're buying gasoline. Like I was like, that's just a really fascinating sort of idea, low key sci-fi, and that doesn't really do much. And even to your point about like Bill, it just felt like that would have been a nice overlap for him to be like, we've been studying it and something about an earthquake that happened 8 years ago destroyed the rain. So it's kind of like,
There
at
you
least for the
go.
audience, you're like,
Bravo.
yeah,
Bravo,
because then
Brandon.
at least like
That
for the
credit is
audience,
amazing.
yeah, because then at least from the audience, you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Like there's just something that you're like anticipating. There's something in the back of your mind. Like you're just like, oh, like, does he know? Like how much does he know? Can she fit? But it just sort of, it almost just seems like an accident that she like fixes it. And so again, it's like one of those things where like something just didn't feel like it gelled completely. But again, a lot of great ideas that are peppered in this, but they just didn't kind of interlock the way that they should have.
Yeah, and I feel like that was a great point. I totally missed that one. And that makes tons of sense. I feel like they should have done something like that as well. But I also feel like the movie, I don't know, it just tried to make these points that just didn't land. I think that when, I think Bo mentioned, or Lila repeated that Bo mentioned that when you take things apart, like when things are broken, you can't put them back together again,
Yeah.
as part of their powers. And I was just like, where in life is that true? I was just like, what does that mean? Like, what exactly does that mean in life? Because
Yeah.
you can fix a broken relationship, right? Like if you fall, you get back up. Like there's just so many things in life that does not relate to. And I was just trying to understand. I was like, why does that make sense or any sense at all? Like why is that important? And then they try to fix it, and Lila gets really, really pissed. It's like, see, I told you, you can't fix it.
I almost thought
Um,
she was going to like fix the seizures.
yeah,
Like I thought there was going to be some moment where like, Lila's going to like do the like force thing and hold her hand out and like nose and start to bleed into, like I was just, again, like I was like all these things peppered in that just didn't climax.
yeah, it didn't make any sense, So I don't know about that line. I don't know about a lot of things in this movie. And to be honest with you, like I think I'm just still confused about the movie. I'm not gonna like the colors itself. Is Were the colors meant to signify that you now have control of your power? Like you're now with yourself. You now have this enlightenment about who you are and your power. And I guess I guess I don't understand the idea of fast colors. Like
Yeah.
I get it. Now I'm getting like really nitpicky and too deep, but I guess I get like you are seeing this euphoria of being able to control your power, as visualized in fast, like rapid colors shooting all over the place. So I think I get that. I'm just not sure why that signifies being able to control your power or whatever it is. For me, I don't know. For me, I just don't get it. What do you think of that? The colors?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost one of those things where, again, when you think about what could have been introduced or just the world of what the rules of their powers are, because it could have even been like, oh, during that same initial sit down breakfast sequence, they could have had a very not throwaway, but just sort of a dialogue about like, oh, you can't see the colors anymore, and like Bo or Lila could have been like, oh, that means that your something is moving too slow. Like you've stopped in the exact same way that people go, with Peter Pan and the ability to fly, it's like, oh, do you believe? Sort of like that kind of aspect. And it's like a very simple, you understand that. And it's like, if you believe that you can fly with like the fairy dust, or if you can have, I think it's like the dreams or wishes or something like that. But it's like very simple. Okay, cool. And so with this, it was like, again, you kind of get what the intent was only because of the trauma that she has sort of when she almost like lost Lila, I suppose, is kind of like what was supposed to have caused all of this with that initial sort of earthquake. But it almost then feels like the movie is in conflict with itself, because if you wanted to be a dramatic movie about someone who is wrestling with addiction and no longer sort of having that, and then kind of going home and dealing with sort of the generational whatever, like that's kind of a different movie. And then the expectations are really just kind of on these like very quiet moments of like, I look at my mother and I, resent her, but then like I look at my daughter and my daughter's starting to resent me for the same thing. And then you have like the sort of classic question of like, am I becoming my parents? And like, is my child becoming, my parents? Like, did I sort of try to overcorrect so far only to come back around full circle? Like these themes and stuff that you can really, really dive into, but it just kind of, again, didn't quite get there. And so, with Fast Color, to exactly your point, it sort of seems like an arbitrary title. They may have said it because I feel like I have like a vague, like I'm like 60% sure it gets mentioned, but it definitely doesn't get explained. And it doesn't get explained in a way that feels like it should be like a very memorable type of thing of like, oh, like you should be able to like you should theoretically walk out of this movie being like, oh, like I wish, my something, my chi, my chakras, my something like that or whatever were like in alignment so that I could see Fast Color. Like that should be like a very clear concept. But like having seen it nearly twice now, it's kind of like I'm with you. It kind of is just one of those things that's just sort of like, okay, great. It's almost like sweating to me, where it's like they do the power and then they see the colors and like great. And it was a great, moment and visual of her like running down the road and doing it, but it didn't hit as hard as it could have hit if we knew a lot more, not only about her powers, but just in the context of like what those powers mean in juxtaposition to even just the rest of the world. Because our only viewpoint with the rest of the world is through the scientist and kind of those other guys. But like, even they seem so low budget. Like they kind of just seem like Bill felt like a very, I understand his character. I actually rewatched, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Phenomenon with John Travolta. It's like this movie where he basically sort of looks up at the sky, gets hit with this light, and then all of a sudden he's like super smart and can like read a book and retains all the information, all this kind of stuff. And there's a scientist in that who's like very genuinely just kind of like, hey, it's really cool that you're like super smart. Like, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? Like you were mentioning that, but then like his bosses are kind of like, wait, there's a guy who can do this. Is he a Russian agent? Is he a this and this and this? And like you get that. And like Bill, to your point earlier, could have been that. Like he could have very much been like, hey, I have this theory about the plates having like affected the rain, and like I've pinpointed it to you. Like I think you can fix it. Like I think like you or because he doesn't know about his family. Like I think there's something that you do that can change this. And even him, again, like some of this is a little bit like cliche and tropey, but it's like then he doesn't need to make a grand sacrifice or anything. It doesn't need to be sort of like that on the nose, but it's like, hey, he's trying to allow this family to sort of continue doing what they do or continue to be in tune with nature, whereas this other group that he's a part of really wants to do we want to weaponize this or make money off of this or whatever. But yeah, just, again, a lot of great ideas that just sort of don't quite get there. And that's why I kind of had mentioned when I was kind of like scrolling through some other like stuff that was kind of just doing some light research, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a TV show, or it was in development for a TV show. We'll see if it actually makes sense. I was like, I hope they dive into this stuff, because again, I could see this being like a really solid, 8 to 10 episodes. But again, I just don't know if they're going to really lean more into what's going on with them and like their powers, and like not so much of where it comes from. There doesn't need to be some grand whatever, but as I mentioned with the John Wick example, we just need a little bit more to understand like the context that they're living in, because right now it kind of seems arbitrary that they have powers, and that almost seems like it was a drama and then they just peppered in some powers to kind of just make it more interesting.
Yep, I 100% agree with that statement. I feel like they just put the powers in there, but necessarily you didn't really necessarily need those powers for this movie to work if they just had good ideas for it. The other thing I will say too is I think that the TV series, if it does become a TV series, I think can do much better, and I think it will. I think your ideas are great. I think they should hire you as a writer on that show and really come up with the next ideas for that. I think that I would like to hear more about like who the scientists are, who do they work for, like what is their mission.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see them work together. I mean, it doesn't always have to be like, it doesn't always have to be like like it doesn't have to be like X-Men, you know, it doesn't have to be like we are mutants and you guys are humans and you even have some mutants who are fighting for humans. It doesn't have to be like us versus them type of thing. I'd like to see a world where they come together, you know, these scientists, and they use her powers to better understand, I don't know, whatever it is. Um, I guess like I'm just talking about like Wish. That's just the nice guy in me. You know? I want everything to get along. I want everything to be rainbows and butterflies. I want everything to be fast colors. I would love to see the scientists work together because it doesn't seem like they were that bad to begin with. So I'd love to see a TV series focused on that a little bit more. I'd love to see a TV series find more of them. I don't know if they all
Yeah.
have the same powers, but maybe they have different powers. And then I'd love to see a TV series find the woman in Europe as well if she's interesting enough. But other than that, I just don't know. I don't even know at this point after watching this movie if I'd even watch the TV series. I'd probably watch the TV series just to see like how they did it different from the movie, how they expanded upon things.
Yeah.
So I'd watch it out of curiosity, but not out of excitement to understand, like, you know, because I love this one, because I love this movie so much. Because I didn't love this movie that much. So a lot left to be answered, a lot of ideas to be developed upon. So I will look out for the TV series that comes out for curiosity's sake, but not out of excitement.
Question, tangentially related question before we get to the, you know, required recommended situation. One of the things that I've, you know, has been on my mind over the last few years is it's become much more aggressively pushed into the zeitgeist is the idea of representation and sort of, you know, the constant sort of, we need to see more of this, we need to see more of us, we need to see more of this and more balance and this and this and this. And it kind of came to a head. Wade and I talked a little bit about this, but I definitely would be super curious about your perspective. I don't know if you saw or heard that they're going to reboot Superman, which isn't news unto itself, but that they're going to make Superman black this time around. And like one of the things, I remember watching that trend on Twitter and people kind of just being like, why are they doing this? Like, there's really no reason to do this. There's plenty of black superheroes that like have not even been touched yet. And I kind of went back and forth with it. And I finally kind of landed on the, although I think it would be interesting to see a black Superman, I don't think we're in the current climate where that could be done well. I don't know if you've seen Watchmen. I'd highly recommend it. Watchmen is pretty much single-handedly responsible for putting the Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street attack on everyone's sort of cultural radar. And I think that show handles it extremely well. And I would have not expected anyone to be able to tie that to a kind of deconstructionist superhero genre. And so I'm curious to know if you think like if a character who's been traditionally white should be black now, kind of almost arbitrarily, but it's very much kind of like, you know, it's in vogue for Superman to be black, I guess you would say at this point. And then B, when you see movies like Fast Color, for instance, I feel like there's this like inner conflict in me to be like, I'm not saying that this movie shouldn't exist. I'm kind of disappointed that if you're Johnny studio executive and you're like, okay, let's see what happens if we finally greenlight this, you know, independent original idea that's like a black superhero thing. And then it's like this movie. And like, this is the movie that they're like, see, it doesn't work kind of thing. And like, I kind of like wrestle with that, like, yeah, it's like this movie isn't a great example, but like, does that matter kind of thing? Like, should there be like 10,000 of these and then like the 4 phenomenal great ones kind of thing? So a lot of questions there. We're just sort of like curious about just your broad thoughts and all that.
So I think when done to your first point about whether or not Superman can be black, who's Superman obviously a traditionally white character, now a remake with a black Superman. I struggle with this one, man. I really do, because I understand why it needs to happen. If you take a step back from like the movie and whether or not it can or should even be done,
Yeah.
Black kids need these role models, right? Like they need to see themselves represented as children when they're kids and they have like Superman or whoever it is, you know, this guy, that guy, Batman, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those guys are always white, right? So you have these children growing up as African Americans, Black kids growing up, and they're idolizing these white superheroes. And in my opinion, we need to see more Black superheroes so that these kids can relate to them. That's the first thing
Yeah.
I'll say.
Agreed.
So when you say like, can Superman be Black? Look, for me, I think he can, or even with a woman's here, Wonder Woman, whoever it is, I think they can be Black. Outside of the kids not having a role model, if you don't take that argument into consideration, for me, I don't want to see Superman as Black. Me personally, I'm not gonna. It's not. That doesn't mean I'm not gonna watch it or I'm gonna have a real problem with it. It's just I just don't think you should try to make that happen. And I think of this is not even remotely the same, but or even close to it. I think things that ruined it for me are like Annie. Jamie Foxx, you know, had Annie, who was obviously traditionally white redhead woman. On Broadway, and you had him do a movie, Jamie Foxx with a Black Annie, which I thought was just ridiculous. And then you had, you know, going way back, even back in the day, you have, you know, Brandy as Cinderella, which I also thought was quite ridiculous. So I think it can be done sophisticated in a way that it could work.
Yeah.
Does it need to be done? I think it needs to be done. I do think it needs to be done. Can it work or should it be done? Would I like it? I probably won't like it. I gotta be honest, I probably won't. So that's the first thing. I want to answer that. That's the first thing. The second thing was whether or not this movie is the one to say like Johnny Studio Man, Johnny producer, like, see, like, you know, we took a chance on this, it didn't do well, so these things don't work with these Black characters or female characters. I don't know if this movie. I just don't know. I don't know if these people really went all in on this movie and said this is going to be the movie to change things.
Yeah.
And I also don't think this movie was mainstream enough to make that point of failure. To say like, oh my God, this was the one. It went mainstream and it failed. I just don't think if you're looking for a scapegoat there, I'm sure you'd have a lot more better examples of movies that went mainstream, where they gambled on an African American cast. And it failed on the big picture.
Yeah,
I don't think this is the movie that's gonna change people's opinions on whether or not this could work or if this is the right formula. But yeah, two incredibly great questions. I want to hear your thoughts on particularly the first one, if Superman can be Black.
Yeah, it's like I think he can be. I think where it gets dicey to me is like, so there's a comic called Red Sun, and basically it's. Superman, it doesn't land in Kansas, he lands in Russia, and it like really leans into just like Russian culture and so like what his values would be and like what his worldview would be. And as Americans, we look at that and we can understand it because there's a layer of distance between us and like Russian culture. It's other, so you understand like the choices that we might disagree with or that we might agree with or that kind of thing. What I worry about is I don't know that America yet knows how to tell a non-stereotypical Black story. Like when you look at something like Black Panther, that's well established, and so like it was an adaptation where they composited a lot of great storylines, and so like that works, that makes sense. Same thing with like Blade, same thing with like Luke Cage. When you come to a Black Superman, this is also part of the sort of argument where there are actually Black Supermen in like alternate universes inside of DC. We won't kind of go down too far there because it's a huge rabbit hole, but it's like, so I think everyone initially thought, oh, okay, like that makes sense because then they have their own origin stories for how they got their powers, blah, blah, blah. But then when it was basically said that they're like, no, they're going to do it with Clark Kent, the first thing I thought I was like, I don't know, man. So like, are we just doing like, are the Kents Black then? Like, are we doing that? And it's just that like, what does it mean to be a Black man with powers in Kansas? Okay, so then like, are we going to acknowledge that he's Black then? Like, is this one of those things where like he's at school and then like people say racist stuff to him? Does he get pulled over? And like the more I went down that like mental rabbit hole, I was like, I don't know, this doesn't sound like a good idea, because it's like the way that you would have to stick that landing to make him feel like a universal character without pandering to people just feels like it's so razor thin. If executed well, that would probably easily be one of the greatest movies of all time and like a really awesome reflection of just kind of like where we are as a society at the moment. But I just feel like it would be, it would come off as either like them preaching too hard about like something or another, or it might be exploitative in the sense of just like, oh, okay, like, does he get pulled over? And then, you know, like the 3 movies we led up to this podcast, does something happen where they go to shoot him or something like that, and then he doesn't die? Like, it's just, there's a lot of stuff there that I don't know needs to be there with Superman, but you can do that with an original character, because then there won't be expectations of this like 100 years of history that people would go, but Clark doesn't do that, or well, in this version, da 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 da. And so you're kind of just allowed to then sit back and just take in the story. But when you're gonna then color this character with a culture that, you know, I think most Americans think like American culture is like white, and then like everyone else has a culture, like, you know, China has culture, and like black people have culture. I just like, I feel like it's too, the margin for error is too likely. And so I would rather, one of the things that people kind of kept saying was like, again, kind of like I was saying, like there are so many other characters that are black that just, you could really, like Black Panther, elevate them, take them out, fully flesh them out. They're lesser known, so the expectations of her, oh, that character doesn't do that, or they wouldn't do that, they're just not there. You can kind of like actually enjoy and sort of follow along with the story, and then you have one more character, to exactly your point, that kids can look up to as like one more hero that's sort of in the mainstream. But I just think doing this with Superman, although you can, and there's like a thin way of doing it extremely well, I just don't think, that just feels like a mess waiting to happen.
Fair. I think it's fair.
Yeah.
Like to me, I agree. I think it just has to be done right.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be done right. It can't be done like, you know, you can't just pick any movie and say, hey, like we're gonna make this cast black, even though it's traditionally white. Because I think it does. It kind of just doesn't feel authentic in a way, and it sounds terrible for me as an African American to be saying this. But in my opinion, it just doesn't feel authentic to just take any movie and say, you know what, we're gonna make this cast black. We're gonna do the whole thing again and make it black.
Yeah.
And I think that there has to be something different. You know, it has to be like, if this is Superman, like it's just everything you just said was totally spot on. Like if this is Superman and he's black, like what does that mean for a supporting character, supporting cast? What does that mean for this story? You can't keep the same exact story. So I do think it can be done. There's just a lot you have to factor in, and I think they can get it done. I think they can get it. They can make it right and make it look good. So I don't know. I guess like it would really start with me, like who they cast for the role.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. Like I don't want to see Michael B. Jordan again. You know, I think like he's great. I think he has his movies that are good. I want to see someone else. Maybe somebody we don't even know yet.
Yeah, I feel like it would have to be an unknown
in this role.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing. So we'll see.
The thing that's funny to me about representation is, pretty much everything I outlined with Superman was sort of my broad stance with representation. Like I 100% agree with you that kids sort of need those role models, so those archetypes to look up to. And I think I kind of, for the longest time, was just like, I never, growing up the way that sort of I grew up, similar to you, just like about in the suburbs, like I just never, that wasn't something I thought about. Like, you know, it's like, I was never like, I want to be the first black, blah, blah, blah. It was always, I want to be the best. And so like, it never occurred to me that I couldn't do anything. It was just like, okay, like if I want to be the best, who are the best? It's these 10 guys. I never looked at those 10 guys as like, oh, of course it's 10 white guys. I was like, oh, okay, like who are these 10 guys? Okay, like this person has these scores, this person has this skill set. It's kind of like when you look at like Batman. I never looked at Batman as like white, or I barely even looked at him as like rich. I was kind of like, oh, okay, like that man studied like these martial arts and he knows this like level of like detective stuff and like this deductive reasoning. And so like I'd read those like criminology books, and like that's why I like psychology kind of like to this day. it's just like stuff like that that I always kind of thought was fascinating from the representation standpoint. The one thing, funnily enough, that changed my mind on it. So I think this was like last year, early last year or around 2019. I played through, it's kind of a funny example, but I played through Mass Effect, all 4 games from like start to finish. I think it took me like 4 months or something like that. And it's one of those games where you can create your own character. And so like I created sort of a black main character. And, you know, you go through all the like ups and downs of like the story, and it's a fantastic series. Highly recommend it to people. They just re-released sort of a legendary edition of the trilogy. And I remember when I went from that game to another game and it didn't have a created character, and I could only play as sort of like, you know, the standard sort of cookie cutter, you know, white protagonist of like, especially like, I think this was like an older game, like early 2000s, it did make me pause. It was like the first time in my life where I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I've never had this moment. I've never had this feeling before. I've never had like, I just kind of was like, oh, cool, I'm playing this game. It's just blah, blah, blah. But it was like after having gone on that journey with Mass Effect, it was the first time that I legitimately was like, I think I get it a little bit more now, but it's kind of, I'm at odds with myself because like, although now I kind of have a little bit more firsthand experience, I still just think strive to be the best, period. Don't try to be the best woman, the best Latino, the best gay, like just try to be the best. And I think I still kind of, you know, try to strive to do that in most of the things that I do kind of in both my personal and professional life. But that definitely was sort of the first time that I was like, yeah, this is interesting, that like now being forced to sort of play a character that I didn't create, now I kind of get a little bit more of what the representation argument, because if this is sort of like the way that you've always perceived things, or you've always done this, you've always done this, and then you kind of get into a situation where you're sort of forced to do this, where you're not forced into a situation that you're unable to control, and then have the added layer of it doesn't look like me, it doesn't sound like me, that's not what I would do. Like I was like, I get it, but I was like, I still just think for the best sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Um, I I don't know a lot of black superheroes. I mean, we can have a discussion about this like some other time.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking about the black superheroes I know. I know Black Panther, obviously. I think Blade
Blade's
could have
like
been like a superhero if you want. I thought that was cool. And then what? Like who else we have? Like Blank Man. Like,
Blank
I
Man,
don't know.
Meteor Man.
What were you saying? Sorry, go ahead.
And I was like Blank Man, Meteor Man,
Yeah, Meteor Man.
Mantis.
I don't know. I just feel like
They're definitely not on the level of Superman. 100%.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
And I think that yeah, you made a great point. We grew up in the suburbs, and I think that didn't necessarily need at the time, although I had it in soccer players because I was a big soccer fan, but I didn't necessarily need at the time, black representation as a role model. My mother was all the role model I needed. She was fantastic. And then I look at where I would have been, if, or not would have been. I just think of other people who aren't as fortunate, other African Americans who aren't as fortunate as I am, and they're growing up
Yeah.
in impoverished neighborhoods who may need somebody that looks like them, who is just kicking ass.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something where, like, yeah, I totally relate to you, but I also try to see the other side, because the kids need those role models. It's very, very important. They have role models that look like them as well, and they believe that they could be worth something else. So I do want to see that for that right only. But again, like to your point, do I need to see it personally? For me, no. But I do want to see it for those kids who need a role model.
Yeah. And so to bring it back to Fast Color, that's kind of why I was asking the question about the, like, do these movies almost have an impact on that conversation? I agree with you. Like, it's not like this movie is definitely going to be, the straw that, pushes, sort of the thing that pushes people either over the fence one way or another. But I do wonder sometimes when, especially like these high profile examples, like I remember like Ghostbusters, kind of the all female version, and like Ocean's 8, like stuff like that, when like those things kind of underperform, and then like the studio executives or the companies and all these the financiers go, oh well, we can't, it doesn't make sense to do that. And it's like, no, they just weren't good movies. Like it's like it doesn't really have anything to do with the cast.
Just
Like it was just,
awful,
yeah,
awful movies.
yeah, they just
Awful.
weren't good
You know?
movies. And so it's like with this, I actually think like the discerning eye will be like, this is not a bad movie. It's just a movie that didn't execute, I think, on like what the genre's expectations were, which is probably why it's getting the TV show. Because hopefully, or I would imagine someone recognized that and was like, okay, like what you were trying to do here, it doesn't work in 90 minutes, but like there's enough here that like if we gave you, you know, 8 more hours of television, you could do something with and make something very, very strong. So to your point, I'm more curious about how this TV series, if it ends up happening, how it'll just sort of tackle the subject material, more so than like something that's like on a highly anticipated list.
For sure. Let's see that TV series.
Yeah. So for the listeners, Yfran, for Fast Color, is this required viewing, kind of despite some of the things we said, or maybe perhaps in support of some of the things we said? Is this recommended viewing? Again, we did talk a lot about how it's got some great ideas in it, and kind of some stuff that is a little bit unique to this movie. Or are there just better movies out there? Kind of pass on this one, see what else is out there that's in the genre featuring a black cast.
Better for me, better movies out there.
Yeah.
There's another movie called The Darkest Minds, and it's the primary character is also a black female. She's the main character. It's all about her. I caught this movie on the way back from Amsterdam on a flight. So I was flying back from Amsterdam to New York. Needed to kill some time, so I watched this movie, and I'll just stop and say that it's 15% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a 15. That's not a joke. 15 on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think in many ways that The Darkest Minds is better than this one.
Nice.
And I think it also focuses on colors and what they mean. It has a black like primary character, but it doesn't talk about like you don't get the feeling that her color matters at all.
Yeah.
Like her race matters at all in this movie. Like it's not even spoken about. There's also like a black supporting character as well, but it's not like a movie that's like, wow, like, you know, these are like black people who are rising to power and we need to do something about it, the type of thing. It's kind of just like, no, these are first and foremost people with extraordinary abilities. And we need to figure out like what their mission or what their cause is, type of thing.
Yeah.
And I thought like that one was definitely more worthwhile than it also has a banging soundtrack, which I love. But I thought that one was much more worthwhile than this one. And so based off that alone, I would recommend that movie and say this one is not a watch.
Very nice. Yeah, I agree. I feel like this movie, like if this is your first foray into call it like somewhat of a genre mashup, this might put you off of that. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this unless you're kind of like, probably someone like I am, who just sort of watches anything and everything. I've gotten some like one-liners out of garbage movies. I think one of my favorite things came from I can't remember what the movie was, but it was this quote where this guy is like, someone says, aren't you going to wish me good luck? And the guy responds, and he's just like, I would, but like it's already happened or something like that. Or it's already happened and you're just telling us the story about how it happened. It was like something like that, where it's like one of those things, but it's like the idea basically being like, what you're living through right now is your success story and you're just telling it to a friend. And like, it's so visceral in the telling that like, it feels like you're living through it right now, kind of thing. And I'm telling you, this one was like terrible, but it was like one of those throwaway lines that you could just tell the writer was like mad proud of himself, was like patting himself on the back. And like, I hope he just like, had the time of his life at the rap party for that one. Yeah, I don't really think because obviously there's not a lot. I was basically just going to say as a blanket statement, go watch some of the, like Colombiana or something like that with Zoe Saldana. She's like a pretty interesting career. Especially since she's basically an Avatar and has been an Avatar for 20 years now, whenever the sequel finally comes out. But yeah, I can't think of another which is probably the point, and probably the sad point that there's not a lot of, I'll call it female-led superhero movies. But if you're talking about sort of the black superhero genre, then hands down, you people need to revisit Wesley Snipes' Blade. That movie is a rare, near perfect movie on my list. I remember seeing that in theaters and just people lost their minds at like almost every point in that movie. Classic, very much a classic. We'll have to watch that at some point. Anything else, Mr. Garcia, that we may have missed that you want to lob onto the fire before we head out here?
Nope, nothing else to add here. It's a no-go for me on this one. I think there's much better movies to watch. But I am happy I watched it because it still makes me, it still gives me something to say, gives me some sort of opinion on the movie. And I just love what you said about like how to make it better. I thought they were like really, not to toot your horn, but I thought they were really, really great ideas. Based off what you said, I would watch that movie all over again if they made those changes. So I left leaving this movie saying, I don't like it. There's nothing that I could gain from it. And I wouldn't even know how to fix this movie. And talking to you about it, I'm actually more excited for the TV series. I want to see, actually, no, just kidding. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I'm not really excited for the TV series at all. I'm happy that they're gonna do a TV series because I want to understand, like, out of curiosity, what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
But based on talking to you, I do want to know what changes they make. What do they expand upon? And you had some good ideas there. So I hope they take your ideas into consideration. But other than that, this movie's a no go for me.
Very nice. And with that, my fellow feathers and arms, that is episode number 4. As we mentioned up top, if you enjoyed what you heard, help us keep it going by supporting us over at patreon.com/Pandora's Quack and becoming a Patreon of one of our tiers, starting as low as $1. Our Patreon is also where you can submit movies with similarly controversial issues for us to get into in the future. And of course, we will be exploring the superhero genre. So if you were following along with us, listeners, we're going to be checking out Blank Man next week. I have not seen Blank Man since I remember wearing out a VHS tape. That's how long it's been. I remember playing like play and rewind and play and rewind. I hope it's as funny as I remember it being as a kid. I haven't seen it in a really long time, so the jokes should be fresh. So looking forward to just like that like 90s/80s like feel of like a movie, especially for this genre. Other than that, feel free to share, rate, and review us on the podcasting service of your choice, and stick around for our aforementioned sister shows. Thank you, Yfran. Thank you, listeners. This podcast was produced by Pandora's Quack. He's Yfran Garcia. I'm Brandan Jones, and these are the conversations that quack. Good night.